Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to another live edition of the WGSN-DB Going Solo Veterans Corner. And of course, I'm your host, retired Army First Sergeant Paul Holbert. And we welcome you once again to the program where we highlight veterans and their experiences and their stories and veteran organizations to not only keep our veterans informed as to what we're doing, but to inform the general public on veterans' lives and activities. So we thank you for joining us. We've got a pretty good show tonight. And before I get into our guest, I want to take just a moment to thank our wonderful sponsors as I do each show because we really appreciate them. Of course, Quest Jewelers from Merrifield, Virginia. And I think that some of you who may be on our network and on our watching some of our other shows have seen their special Valentine's Day ad that we've started running because we all know that special day is coming. And speaking of that, if you're looking for something on that special day for that special someone, I recommend you call Pete or Wantain. There's their information, questjewelers.com. Get in touch with them, talk with them. If you want something custom made, they can do it. Or if you just like to shop their inventory in the store, they'll be more than happy to help you. And for those of you who are watching the show, if you call Pete and contact him and tell him that you watched the show and you wanted to talk to him about buying something in the store, he will give you a discount. So by all means, throw my name in there, tell him you saw me on here and I told you to call him. We also want to thank Nationwide IT Services. Nationwide IT is a service-disabled, veteran-owned small business located here in Northern Virginia, owned by retired Army Warrant Officer C.K. Park and his crew. CK, and he has a cast of professionals there that can help you with all of your business needs, whether it's IT support, training, 360 studies, surveys, program management, whatever you may need. CK and his crew of professionals are there to help you out. I also want to point out that CK not only supports our show, but his company also donates to cancer research. In fact, all the money his employees raise, his company matches it dollar for dollar to turn in for cancer research. So we really want to thank them for all of the support that they give the communities they are in. So those are our wonderful sponsors, and thank you to them. I want to talk about tonight's guest, and I want to welcome retired Marine Colonel Jeff Ribel. Sorry about that, Jeff. I have one of my boys has actually spent 5 years in the Marines. So, but Jeff comes to us from Northern Virginia, and Jeff is actually, interestingly enough, a graduate of Annapolis, the Naval Academy. And Jeff, before we get started, I got one question to ask you about that too when we get to it, because I know you finished your undergraduate degree there and also completed some of your graduate studies both at Annapolis, and I'm sure that was interesting. Jeff spent 24 years between active and reserve time in the Marine Corps, is now retired and is working in the private sector. And we're going to talk to him about some of the things he's doing now. But I want to spend a little time talking to him about his military service. And Jeff, before we do, I have to tell you, during my time in the Army, I retired as a first sergeant, and I still remember my first assignment in Korea back in 1981 when I was in a fire directions center in an artillery battery. And I had a battery commander who was a West Point graduate. So I have to tell you, the guy was very, all the soldiers in the unit said, he's really laid back for a West Point graduate. He was very even-keeled, even-tempered. He communicated well with the soldiers in the battery. But the one thing we noticed was, I still don't think that he grasped the correct West Point salute, because he had a habit of saluting with his fingers open. Oh, no. And of course, that was one of the jokes we had in the unit. So I just want to ask you, when you were at Annapolis, did they teach you the Navy or the Marine Corps salute?
Well, theoretically, they're the same, right?
Yeah, they're supposed to be, right?
That's right.
That's right. So, but I want to welcome you and thank you for taking the time to come on the show. And I have to ask you about your experiences a little bit at Annapolis. Can you share with us a little bit of what that was like? Because, it's so much different than the other avenues of how people end up in the military.
It is. It was definitely very unique. I guess, first off, thanks for the wonderful introduction and for having me on. I'm looking forward to the discussion, and hopefully other veterans and families can benefit from my experience. And I'd really like to talk also about other people who are heroes every day.
Hmm.
So, uh, on that note, I'd actually like to thank my wife for being there for me throughout life's journey. We've
Yeah.
been together for over 35 years and just celebrated 31 years of marriage.
Mm.
So, as you pointed out, she's stuck with me the whole way and been a key person in my support network. And then, obviously, I'd like to shout out to any other family and friends watching. And I think I have some future guests for you as well. We can talk about later.
Yeah. You also have you have a grown son and what, two dogs as well at home?
We do. We do. My
Yeah.
son is 26. He's just an outstanding human being. And I think his most recent excitement has been in 2020, he was on Jeopardy.
Oh.
And we got to go out and participate in the filming of his episode.
Oh.
And
Okay.
last year, he actually got a feature article published in Wired magazine.
Oh.
So very proud dad, and appreciate his life journey.
Hmm.
So you asked about the Naval Academy, and I guess that kind of makes me think about, well, why was I even interested in the military? And I grew up in on the west coast of Florida, not too far from MacDill Air Force Base. So I was always, had a military base nearby. I had on both sides of my family first responders, firefighters, policemen, um, nurses, and some other jobs like that in my family that were early influencers in terms of that desire to serve.
Hmm.
And my stepfather, actually, you can relate to this, Paul, was Army military policeman. So he actually encouraged me to take a look at the service academies as an option. And I did that as I was considering my, what I was going to do next, what was going to be next for me. I had these, early teenager visions of playing football,
Yeah.
and I wasn't quite tier one, Division One prospect. And so ultimately, after visiting the Naval Academy and going through the nomination process and getting accepted, I decided that I wanted to go there, and that oh, by the way, would also be a great way to continue playing football, because I spent all 4 of my years there playing varsity lightweight football. So that
Oh.
was
Okay.
great, sort of a great sanity check for me that kept me active and grounded outside of everything wild and crazy going on around me in that
Yeah.
environment. You asked what it was like. I think it's one of those things that, first I would say it is not college.
Yeah.
um, there is no college experience there. You take courses and you get military training, but it's not
Hmm.
like a college. It's more like a very structured environment that the military uses to test your character, to build your character, and to force you to come out the other end of that process with good time management skills, uh, broad exposure to a big swath of the rest of society from all over the country,
Yeah.
and in a lot of cases, the world at that age. And you just come out of it really a different person than you went in. I remember going in being very immature and having a certain viewpoint that changes a great deal when you learn humility You learn what everybody else around you did before they got there and how they behave when they're there with you, serving with you, and being good and bad influences. And it's a very unique experience. It's one of those things that probably isn't for everybody.
Yeah.
I think you have to recognize that first year is a game, much like boot camp. If you think of it as a game, and that you are going through the process, and there's a purpose for everything that you're doing, even if it doesn't make sense to you at the time, it's easier to come out the other side, with a sense of humor and the ability to deal with a lot of adversity and challenges that were put in front of you exactly for that reason, to help you learn how to deal with any variety of situations, and what resources you have inside yourself, as well as relying on other people to help you out.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much true for most of the folks coming into the military. Like you said, when they hit basic training, I think that's pretty much gives them that same, how can I say, that same shock adjustment value. Because I remember my early time in basic training back in 1981. It's much different than it is even today. So, and I know once you came out of the academy, you had a variety of assignments during your time, and you spent time both on active duty and the reserves before you retired. You started out with a battalion communications officer, and then spent time on the USS Wasp. So why don't you share a little bit of that with us?
Absolutely. So once I graduated, I was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps. Only about 1/6 of our class went Marine Corps. Everybody else was Navy. So,
I'm sorry, Jeff. Let me just ask you. No, let me just ask you there, because I always wondered, how did they select you guys that way? Was it predetermined, or did they come out and tell you while you were there?
Right. So they have a service selection process that culminates at the end of the first semester of your senior year. And at that point, you've gone through a number of summers where you have gone and done some time with the Marines, mostly in Quantico. You've been out on ships with the surface fleet in the Navy. You've been on submarines. You've been at Navy and Marine Corps air stations. You probably had an opportunity to actually fly. In my case, all of us really were able to have some stick time in a trainer jet as well as in a helicopter. Oh. So they really give you a good look at what your options are. And the concept is that, you get to pick what you want to do, but obviously that's constrained by how many billets they have and what they need at the time, and how well you've done throughout your time there, because the number one person in the class picks first. So I was not the number one pick in my class by far, but I did choose Marine Corps, and I think in some ways it probably chose me as well. So everybody gets a pretty good shot at what they want to do. And ultimately, I think that getting exposed to all those options, and spending at least 5 years, and for some of us much longer than that, in the military, really gives you exposure to how all those bits and pieces fit together, from a joint warfighting standpoint, as well as, the fact that the military is there as a last resort. We're not itching to go fight.
Yeah.
We're prepared and ready should that happen. But, there's something to be said for diplomacy and for human beings being able to get along with each other without killing each other.
Yeah. Yeah. So you, like I said, you started out in a battalion, you spent time on the Wasp. So was it that big of a difference? Because the battalion, I'm assuming you were aground somewhere as opposed to the WASP where you were out in the fleet.
Right.
So is
Yeah.
it what I mean? What was the big difference between those two, as opposed to the fleet versus being in a ground assignment? With
Sure.
Marines.
Yeah, definitely very different. I actually was a communications officer at 2nd Tank Battalion up in
Oh,
North Carolina. So, that time was spent making sure that several companies, the whole battalion of tanks and the forces that were attached to that battalion for military operations had the ability to communicate with each other. As we say in the Marine
yeah,
Corps, we need to be able to shoot, move, and communicate.
yeah.
So I had the communicate part.
So
And
did you enjoy the armor? Because I tell you, I spent about 4.5 of my 21 years in the Army in armored cav units with
there you go.
M1s and everything else. So how did you like the armor?
Yeah, it was interesting. It was. I actually didn't get to ride in the tanks too much.
No.
We had other vehicles. We had our own small fleet of small grouping of vehicles that were designed for communications, and we would follow and trace or go out in advance and set up command posts and do things like that for the tanks.
Yeah.
And when they would go to, for example, Fort Knox to qualify, actually shoot the tanks and qualify on an annual basis, we would go with them and set up communications and make sure everything was good for them to operate. So,
Gosh,
very
I
different.
just let me just kind of poke at something here, because you were saying that they went to Fort Knox once a year to qualify. So I can imagine that is. I remember when I was in 2nd Armored Cav, just moving our tanks from our home, like from Nuremberg or Amberg somewhere, out to Grafenwehr by rail. I can imagine what a production it was for you guys to have to load those tanks up from down in Carolina to go to Fort Knox.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was a major logistical event. For that, or really any deployment, to take the tanks anywhere costs a lot of money and is a serious commitment of logistical force to make that happen. So definitely. You asked how that was different from shipboard life. So I was the Marine Communication Detachment officer in charge on the USS Wasp. I was actually assigned to the ship's company, so I belonged to the Navy. And the way it was supposed to work is when the Marines embarked on board, I would chop over to control of the Marine Expeditionary Unit that would embark on WASP and deploy for 6 months at a time, sometimes longer, sometimes shorter. Didn't exactly work that way. I was basically the assistant communications officer for the ship, which was actually a really good experience because I got to work with the Marines, but I also ended up being the technical control officer, working with all the satellite communications and all the internal communications that were on a ship that's only slightly smaller than the size of a Navy carrier.
Cool.
So WASP is an amphibious assault ship that carries MV-22 Ospreys these days, and it was Harrier jets and also big contingent of different types of helicopters for supporting Marines who were deployed doing military things.
Yeah, I told you that one of our boys spent 5 years in, and in fact, he was crewing, and he was a mechanic and crewing, and in fact, the Osprey was one of the aircraft that he worked on. And then his uncle, my brother-in-law, was a career Marine, 24 years, and he did the same thing. He spent his entire career in Marine Corps aviation, as a mechanic and crew and those types of things. So I remember going down to camp. Was it? Camp Lejeune, right?
Yes.
Down in Carolina. I'm losing. See, I can remember all the Army posts, but I'm still, a little rusty with some of the other ones.
Yep.
But yeah, we went down there to visit, and both of them served, and both of them were in marine aviation and working with the Ospreys and some of the helicopters. So kind of interesting. Well, we're gonna take a short break here, and when we come back, we're gonna pick up the conversation with Jeff, because I want him to share some of his experiences and some of the other fellow service members that he served with us, and tell us a little bit about them. So we will be right back on the other side of this representation from our sponsors. All right, welcome back, everyone, and you've been watching the WGSN-DB Going Solo Veterans Corner, and I'm your host, retired Army First Sergeant Paul Holbert. And welcome back, and we've been talking with retired Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel Jeff Ribel. And Jeff, before the break, we were talking a little bit about how you had served both on land within a ground unit and out in the fleet on the USS Wasp. But I know you'd sent me a couple of other photos, and we weren't able to get them all up on the screen for the ad. But you had mentioned a friend of yours, a retired Captain Rich Logren, I think it was Logren.
Yeah.
And then you had another, I think, another experience you wanted to share with us about a sergeant major in Way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, please go ahead. And so, because, we all know as veterans, we run into so many different people during our careers. And, I had the privilege of running into Colin Powell once while I was out in the desert during Desert Storm, or just prior to. And, we run into so many different people. We meet a lot of different people that impact our lives. And, I'd love for you to share how these people impacted you.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me back up a minute and talk about the Wasp. I spent 2 years on board there, and one of the inspirational people I want to talk about was from that time in my military career. But the Wasp was just 2 years packed with unbelievable activity. We had 3 ships captains. During those 2 years, one of them was relieved because before I got there, he had run the ship aground, unfortunately. We had a Harrier crash in the
Ooh.
Atlantic, went over the bow of the ship. We were deployed to Stavanger, Norway, doing a North Atlantic military exercise, and we were blown off anchor in a port in Stavanger, Norway. We had skirted a hurricane to get up there in the North Atlantic, and we weathered that, but it basically beat 3 10-foot tall divots in the bow of the ship. So the steel had
Mm.
the weather was so bad, the steel had divots in the front of the ship.
Wow.
And we also actually had a collision at sea during an underway replenishment where the support ship that was alongside of us, passing supplies across to us while we were steaming, kind of got sucked into they call it the Venturi effect, but the smaller ship got sucked into the wake of our much larger ship, and they bumped each other. We did besides that North Atlantic time, we did Haiti in '94, and we were in the Adriatic for 6 months during Bosnia. So it was very exciting from a military career standpoint. A lot going on, a lot to learn, and as you mentioned, part of what you learn is exposure to other people.
Mm-hmm.
So going back, you mentioned there were 2 pictures in my that I sent you that are in the advertisement for the show that people have probably seen in opening up the show to watch. But one of them is taking another step back, actually forward from the WASP. When I was at Quantico, I pinned on Major, and it's a picture of my wife pinning
Yeah.
Major on with me, and then standing with me and my son after that promotion ceremony. It was kind of one of those, okay, I've moved beyond the WASP and those adventures and transitioned into civilian life and become a reservist, and still proud to serve, but serving in a different way that works for my family and my life.
Yeah.
And then the other picture was actually a picture of me and, as you mentioned, Rich Lofgren, when we were, young O3s standing in front of USS Wasp on what was supposed to be Liberty, as you know what it's called, time
Yep.
away from duty, where you can, go out in town and experience many places around the world in the case of a ship deploying all over the place. However, if you look at the picture, Rich and I aren't exactly smiling. And it was probably, because we weren't going to be out for very long because of all the other stuff going on that I described.
Yeah.
But, yeah, that was an interesting picture. And then another one that I sent you that I don't think, there was room to put it in the advertisement was a picture in Hue City in Vietnam in '68. And it's just a picture of a white building that doesn't look like it really bore the brunt of a battle. But the city was pretty well destroyed
Yeah.
during that battle. There was a lot of urban warfare and ground to ground, building to building fighting going on. And the picture shows 4 Marines in their battle gear, basically with their weapons, walking out down the stairs of this building. And the guy in the front is the first lieutenant who took over from the captain, company commander for this company in Hue City that basically secured the city in the battle. And they had just relieved that building from the hands of the enemy. And it turned out to be that part of the building was a little chapel. And the picture is actually very fortuitous, kind of an omen in a way for some of the folks walking out of the building. The last one in line who wanted to make sure all of his people got out of the building was actually the first sergeant. His name was John Canley, and he actually won the Medal of Honor for his actions in Hue City and during that time in Vietnam.
Oh, wow.
in '68, in mid '68. So I would encourage people to read his Medal of Honor citation. His story is unbelievable. The third person in line, right in front of the gentleman who became Sergeant Major Canley, is the Lance Corporal radioman who had enlisted in the Marine Corps, ended up in Vietnam, and spent 13 months over there himself, who later became a Navy chaplain and was the chaplain on the USS Wasp
Oh,
while Rich and I were on that ship. And
yeah.
so Father Dennis Rocheford was his name. And this guy is, what I think of as an everyday hero. A lot of people will say, thank you for your service and things like that. And that's certainly appreciated. But when I think about people who served and made a huge impact, it's not many
Yeah.
people like Father Dennis. He,
Mm.
he was a Marine in Vietnam. And after he got out, he basically decided that he had done enough praying in Vietnam, talking to the Lord and saying that, Lord, if you spare me, I will be in your service for my lifetime. And that's exactly what he did.
Oh,
He went to college after he left Vietnam, went into seminary and became a priest. And at some point along the way, he joined the Navy and was a chaplain in the Navy. And you know as well as I do that chaplains aren't just, in his case, a priest.
right.
They minister to everyone. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter what your religion is. It doesn't matter what you believe in. They're there to support you in your spiritual life while you're in the military. And
Yeah.
Father Dennis was one of those people that made an impact on many, many thousands. I would venture to say tens of thousands of people over the course of his long time in the military. And in my case, on the Wasp, he was just somebody who walked in the room with a smile on his face, and he just radiated that joy that and the charisma that everybody was drawn to. And he had such a calming effect on everybody he came in contact with. Just a real blessing in terms of human being and how he ministered to everybody who needed it, and was just a friend for everybody who didn't need that from a religious standpoint. Somebody else he served with wrote a great article. Maybe we can post the link or something. But this gent's name is Benjamin Sledge, and I'd like to read a quick piece that he wrote about Father Dennis. It says it way better than I could.
Okay.
And I'm going to slip this in now. The title of the article is called "When the Lighthouse Burns Out: A Story of Suicide and Loss." Unfortunately, Father Dennis
Rough to talk about, I know. It's all right.
He took his own life in 2009.
Oh gosh.
So this gentleman who had similar experiences with him, Benjamin Sledge, he writes that he said, Dennis Rocheford never made me call him father. Instead, he was just Dennis and sometimes father if I felt like it. I think part of it was that we both saw each other as wounded equals, not just in the literal sense, but emotionally too. While we both had earned Purple Hearts in combat, Dennis had 2, as well as a Bronze Star. There was always an underlying melancholy we both sensed in each other. So he asked Dennis, how did you become a priest? And Dennis smiled warmly, his demeanor almost reminiscent of someone remembering they had been baking cookies. It was after I survived the Tet Offensive in Vietnam. We went in with 150 in my company. Only 6 of us survived, and I was one of those 6. When the fighting was at its fiercest and I didn't think I was going to make it, I asked God to spare me, and he did. Afterward, I wanted to dedicate my life to his service and thanks, and that's how I ended up as a priest.
Wow.
So Ben continues to say that, it's a lonely road taking on the burdens and hurts of others. I think Dennis knew that, enough so that it drove him to alcoholism. Everybody's got scars, even the best of us. And the wars and the loss of his men only fueled his despair. And this is Ben talking. I have to wonder, in the many years he cared for others, how many people took a moment to ask him, Dennis, how are you doing?
Yeah.
It's a lonely road taking on the burdens and hurts of others. I think Dennis knew that. Even so, 7 years after his death, I wish I could tell him how instrumental he was, how thankful I am that he took the time to love me while I was in despair, that I'm happy and growing because of the influence he had in my life. I just wish I could have done the same for him. Perhaps the hardest part about suicide is that it doesn't end the pain, instead passes to the ones who loved you.
Yeah.
I kept silent for many years about Dennis because of the pain I still felt over his loss. And he goes on to say that just maybe if someone had stopped to love him the way he loved others, he'd be with us today. Being a priest and a veteran must have been really hard. Everyone expected him to be strong and carry their burdens, but who helped carry his? And this is a great closing point. He says, I guess the greatest lesson I've learned from his death is the importance of being a beacon of hope for others. Here he was, a lighthouse in the midst of a storm for me and so many others, but he needed that from other people too. I have to wonder if maybe you're the lighthouse in the storm someone else needs. So that, Paul, is probably the thought I would leave you with at the end of the show. And in the meantime, somebody else I wanted to mention who's part of my family is my mother-in-law's husband, who himself was also, he was a Navy corpsman, spent time in Vietnam taking care of Marines, was deployed in the field with Marines, and, lived that early life of service and took that out of the service with him and became a nurse. And all the way to the end of his life, he was a nurse who took care of other people. And, it's just that devotion to service that sticks in my mind about people like that who are real role models and make an impact on people like me and encourage me to serve in my own way. And I think, all veterans know people like that and have their own origin story about how they got in the military and what they did with it and what they take out of it. But that, that is probably the thing that I would love to leave with veterans or anyone else really, is that, if COVID has taught us anything, it's to take care of yourself and love the people in your life. And everybody needs a social safety net of family and friends to support you throughout life's journey, especially veterans. And if you no longer have people in your life who can relate to you and be your battle buddy, like I was talking about earlier, then find other support. If you need help, get it. Because in those dark times, I think people tend to not see that others are trying to help them. So as my fellow Marine Ben said about Father Dennis, be a lighthouse in the storm that somebody else needs.
Yeah, man, I got to tell you, thank you for sharing that, because, when you read that on average 22 veterans a day commit suicide, it's really a story, and you're talking about needing that safety net. And I mean, I have to tell you, my wife was my safety net. She was the one who pushed me to go get help when I was suffering pretty badly with PTSD. Didn't want to get help. I was stubborn, but that was my safety net, and she took care of me and pushed me to get help and has been taking care of me ever since. So you're right. It's always good to have that. But I wanted to, and that was, I want to thank you for that story, because that was, I think, just what we need to hear. But before we close, since we've talked about your thought, I just wanted to give you an opportunity. I know that you continue to try and serve and work with organizations. We still have a couple more minutes. I wonder if in a couple of minutes you could share with us. I know that you work with Toys for Tots, but I know there's another organization, Wine to Water, that you've done some work with. Could you take a couple of minutes and just share with us those that you're working?
Absolutely, yeah. So I don't work directly with Toys for Tots, but it's one of those Marine Corps. The Marine Corps started that that effort to ask people to donate what they could, drop a toy in a box, and that thought has turned into millions and millions, tens of millions of toys that have gone to kids over the last, I don't even know how many years it is. It's over 20.
Yeah.
It's longer than I think I've been in the service. So maybe 30 plus years. That Toys for Tots has been collecting toys for kids over the holidays. So definitely, look for that box. They have them in stores in the mall, and it's very easy to go grab something and put something in the box for the kids who may not get something themselves if it were up to their personal circumstances. So please do that. Two others I'd like to talk about very briefly is one of them is Team Rubicon. So Team Rubicon is it's almost like I think of it as like a civilian federal emergency management agency.
Mm-hmm.
They have regions in the country, and they staff those regions with volunteers who help after a disaster. So floods, hurricanes, earthquakes, COVID, getting help and assistance to families who need it in all those cases. That's what Team Rubicon does. And the reason I found out about it and gravitated to it is because it was started by veterans, and it was really started by those veterans to help other veterans when they left their military service to have something to gravitate to and feel like they were part of something that was greater than themselves. So that, that loss of touch with the military experience that you had is really tough on people when you lose it. I chose to go in the reserves because I didn't want to lose it and just leave the Marine Corps outright, 22 years ago. So I went in the reserves, and I spent the rest of my reserve time, continuing to be a Marine. And I think that Team Rubicon is a great way for any vets who have put their military service behind them or are looking to do something different, but still have that purpose in life and to have a mission that matters.
Yeah.
To, join an organization that really has their stuff together and is bringing, being that ray of hope and bringing goodness to people, I'll say around the country, but also throughout the world, because they deploy all over the place. So if you enjoyed your deployments and, like traveling and want to join Team Rubicon to do that around the country or around the world, they're there and they're great. It also turns out later, this was after I had been exposed to Team Rubicon, one of my classmates is now the CEO of the organization. So Art De La Cruz may be one of those people who can come on the show and talk in more detail about Team Rubicon, but that's a great organization. And to wrap it up, my Marine Corps buddy, Tim Ogden, is part of an organization called Wine to Water. And Wine to Water basically sells wine, and they take the proceeds from selling their wine to pay for procuring and building filters, water filters that they donate and deliver. They put them together and they deliver them around the world. A lot of that obviously is going to Africa and to places like that. But I would encourage any people who, care about others and understand the dire need for water and some of the geopolitical and other ramifications associated with the world's water supply, to get involved with Wine to Water, even if it's just, show up for a filter build and devote 20 minutes to the simple process of taking the parts of a very basic filter and putting them together in a kind of assembly line way. And, within 30 minutes, we've got several hundred filters built and boxed up, ready to ship. So it's really interesting process and very fun to know that, with such a simple level of effort, you're really making a big impact on families around the world. So I would.
Well, do they sell wine on their website or?
Usually they take it to the events they go to. I think I would
Okay.
refer to Tim Ogden and Doc and some of the other people involved. They're at winetowater.org.
Yeah.
And, you can't escape the biblical reference there either. So great cause. And I would encourage people to get involved with any one of those three. Donate some of your time. It doesn't have to be money.
Yeah.
And, get involved. And for the veterans, these are great ways to find, the next part of your journey in life, or to become affiliated with another mission that isn't the military anymore.
Well, Jeff, I got to tell you, I want to thank you for all of that. And I want to thank you for especially the story that you told and shared with us, and that thought. I've had, over the last almost going on 4 years now, a lot of guests from different organizations, and, each of them have a story or something to share. But when you share something like that really kind of strikes home, it's something that, we need to remember. So I want to thank you for that. And for those of you, you can see on the bottom of the screen, the VA crisis line. Please, like Jeff was saying, sometimes you need that beacon of light out there somewhere. And if you can't find it right around you, you can pick up the phone or send a text, and you can get someone to help. And don't forget, on one of my previous shows, I mentioned that the VA on their emergency crisis line had already sent out over 4,500 people just from phone calls to help veterans in crisis. So, if you need that help, like Jeff was talking about, make sure you reach out. So Jeff, I want to thank you for spending the time to come on the show tonight, sharing your story and sharing that information with us. We really appreciate having you on.
Absolutely. I enjoyed it. Apologize for losing it talking about Father Dennis. I knew that was going to happen, but
no, that's okay. It's not the first time it's happened on here, so don't worry. I've done it myself, so by all means, don't worry about it. We appreciate it. And for those of you out there in our audience, we want to thank you for taking the time to join us on the WGSN-DB Going Solo Veterans Corner. I'm your host, retired Army First Sergeant Paul Holbert. And to all you veterans out there, when we say it, we mean it. Thank you for your service. To the families, thank you for your support. We hope that you have a chance to live your best life. And remember, if you need the help, reach out to someone and ask for it. So thank you, and we'll see you on our next show.
Semper Fi.